Seats down the front. Nice ones down here. These are the audience participation seats. You don't want to pass these up. Really? You might get singled out of the crowd. I feel it in my bones.
It's my great pleasure to introduce Carlo Gébler, who will be talking to us about his latest book, Aesop's Fables. Carlo is a very special friend of mine, even though we only met in person when he came to Reading Kinsale at the Arts Week about 10 years ago. We have been shadowing each other pretty much all our life, or as he put it when he launched my story collection in Dublin, we are on the same escalator and occasionally catch glimpses of each other as we glide up and down. We both grew up in the same part of South London, as you can probably hear. We published our first novels in the early 1980s with the same publisher, Hamish Hamilton, and the same editor. In fact, I think they came out within days of each other. It was really, I said, who's this Carlo Gébler? Why are they all reviewing him? Anyway, the usual thing. And then I was mentored for a while by Carlo's father, Ernest Gébler, up in Dorky. And before that, I had met his famous mother, Edna O'Brien, in Soho through her friend Thea Porter. Carlo moved to Ireland with his wife Tiger a few years after I came to live in Kinsale. He went to Enniskillen because he'd been commissioned to write a book about Northern Ireland, and there he stayed for 30 years now. He arrived, he says, on the 11th of July, 1989. He's very precise like that. And there they have reared 5 children who've now all gone. And he's a great addition to the local community and is one of the hard-working people behind Enniskillen's Happy Days Samuel Beckett Festival. Carlo has published many books since then. Most recently, The Innocent of Falkland Road, which is a classic childhood story, in addition to numerous non-fiction books, including My Father's Watch, written with Patrick Maguire, the wrongly accused of the Guildford bombings, and a compelling childhood memoir, My Father and I. He's written plays, children's books, a history of the Siege of Derry, an opera about his musician grandfather Adolf Gébler, and a hilarious memoir called Confessions of a Catastrophist, which will be reissued shortly. He also has a busy career as a teacher of creative writing. He's taught for longer than anyone else in the prison service of Northern Ireland, and currently teaches at Trinity College, Dublin, and the American College, also in Dublin. He's a graduate of the National Film School in the UK and has made several films, including one about his father. He's a member of Aesop and for a long time was active in the Dublin Writers' Centre. He was awarded a PhD by Queen's University Belfast in 2010 on the strength of his publications, one of the first such in Ireland. He's currently working on a radio programme called The Hidden Reservoir, The Art of the Troubles, which will be going out on Radio 3 on Sunday the 20th of October at 6:45. So there's a date for your diary. It sounds quite fascinating, compelling even. Besides all these literary achievements, Carlo is enormously popular among his fellow writers and has a wide circle of friends in Dublin, Belfast, Cork, London, Sligo, wherever. We all admire him for his amazing work ethic. Nobody works harder than Carlo, yet he still finds time to socialise and have fun. He's known for his fairness and generosity as a reviewer, and he is formidably well read. So please welcome Carlo to Cork City Library.
Yeah, I booked myself onto the ferry from Scotland to Northern Ireland when we were moving over on the 11th of July.
not thinking, what the fuck? We were on a boat with 600 bandsmen and, well, all the Catholics had disappeared, went down to the bottom of the boat. We had a copy of The Guardian, which we thought we could use as protection against the bandsmen. The bandsmen kept on saying to us, the ones we talked to, we're going to Keady. It's 110% Catholic. Do you think they'll like us? Yes, I think you're going to be a huge hit. Yeah. Yes, that was one of my more stupid. So I've written a book. This book, well, I haven't written it. I've stolen. I've stolen from somebody else and then repurposed it and passed it off as my own work, which is what we do. Aesop. We will talk about Aesop, but I'm just going to read you 2 short Aesopian fables, which I've taken and then reconfigured, but without violating the integrity of the original, into a modern idiom. The first is called The Fox and the Farmer. I'm dedicating this to that charming gentleman, Mr. Johnson, that titan of modesty, good temper. The Fox and the Farmer. One night, a fox went to a farm and killed every bird in the hen house. When the farmer came out in the morning and saw the carnage, he was incensed. Mr. Fox, he vowed, I'll pay you back for what you've done. He set a trap and caught the fox alive. Right, said the farmer. I promised I would pay you back, and I'm a man of my word. He tied a rope soaked in oil to the fox's tail. Then he set the rope alight and released the fox on the track in front of his farmhouse. The fox ran about, trailing the burning rope, yelping and screaming as the flames spread up his tail. Hey, stupid, your tail's on fire, the farmer shouted. It was great sport watching the fox running about in a frenzy, trying to escape the flames it could never escape. But then, crazed and panic-stricken, the fox left the track and bolted towards the field where the farmer's wheat crop, tall and lovely and dry, stood ready and waiting to be harvested. Hey, no, not that way, the farmer bellowed. The farmer ran his fastest, but his fastest wasn't fast enough to catch the fox before it got right into the middle of the field and set the crop alight. The flames spread and the whole field became a burning, raging conflagration. The farmer stood on the edge and watched. He felt the heat of the flames on his face and smelled the familiar smell of burning straw. It made his eyes sting and his throat hurt. What will my children eat if we have no bread? He said. But there was no one there to hear him, let alone answer. The moral: do not lift the club too high. It may fall on your head. And I'm going to read you one more. This is called The Prophetess. There's no god so angry, the prophetess liked to boast, but my charms won't bring him round. Many citizens in the city believed the prophetess, sought her out and paid her handsomely for interceding with the angry gods on their behalf. Other citizens, however, infuriated she should have reputation, wealth, and status. Of course, they envied her, were of the contrary opinion. The pinnacles of high walls fall down, and the dung heaps rise, they raged. She's a witch. Her magic is black. The authorities heard these words and understood what was being implied. They had the prophetess arrested, charged with witchcraft, and hauled into court, where it had all been fixed in advance. The judge found her guilty and sentenced her to death. No sooner had the judge finished speaking, but the prophetess was dragged off to the gallows that stood in front of the courts of justice, and everyone who'd attended her trial came out to watch her execution, which they welcomed, of course. As the hangman put the noose around the prophetess's neck, one of the good citizens shouted, "Once you boasted, no one managed the anger of the gods better than you did, yet you couldn't manage the anger of the people, could you?" The crowd loved this. It said exactly what they felt, and their delighted howls of approval were the last thing the prophetess heard on earth before the trap dropped and her neck snapped. A few minutes later, the prophetess was strung up by her feet with her dress hanging down over her face. The crowd began to disperse. Spirits were high, for not only had justice been served, but there had also been that marvellous quip thrown by the citizen right at the end. It summed up their feelings in a lovely single sentence, and it wasn't often that the last word was got in like that, so perfectly and so neatly and so finally. Yes, a great day. Everyone in the crowd agreed, a great day. But later, lying in their beds in the darkness, the image of the upside-down, dangling prophetess, burning before their mind's eyes, no one could sleep. The evil which issues from the mouth falls into thy bosom. The second one, the prophetess. I worked on this with Gavin Weston, the artist. And when we were talking about this, he had the photographs of Mussolini and his mistress strung up the petrol station outside Milan, where the partisans shot them. And he had both sets of photographs. So the first set of photographs where the mistress's clothes are hanging down, and the second set where a priest has come along and tied them up to protect her modesty. They are awful. But that's the kind of book this is. It's about, the awfulness of human beings, their stupidity, and the ghastliness of people who have power.
So it's not surprising, really, that you were attracted to it?
No. Did you read Aesop as a child?
Yes, I went to 2 or 3 primary schools because we moved around a lot. And every new primary school, they come up with Aesop's Fables.
Mm.
So
why do you think they did that?
To torture us, I don't know.
Mm.
They seemed, I think because they were very watered down, they seemed kind of, to me, a kind of dull, predictable sort of reading, but they were nowhere like these ones.
Mm.
And they were mainly the animal ones.
I think that, we were all exposed to Aesop as children.
Is that still going on, do you think? There are no primary school teachers here. I mean, is it still on the curriculum? Aesop's Fables? No? Okay. Oh, your parents would give them to you. Yes. In picture books. Yeah. Yeah, for bedtime reading. Nice.
Well, we can talk about Aesop and who he was and the canon when it came into existence. But let's just talk about what was made of the material, the use that was made of the material by pedagogues and educationalists in the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th and 20th centuries. So they saw Aesop, this is a generalization, as a way of, well, first of all, improving reading, improving language skills, delivering narrative, but also as a way for the inculcation of socially laudable, right-thinking, appropriate ideas, because of the way in which the story would always come attached with an explanatory moral. And the morals in the fables, the Aesop fables that Alannah remembers reading, and I remember reading as a child, tended to be of the platitudinous.
That's the word.
Yeah.
Yes.
Never put off till tomorrow what you can do today. That kind of stuff.
So, as you put it, they were the means by which moral absolutes are shoehorned into the heads of the impressionable young.
Yeah.
I like the shoehorning because it wasn't an option, was it? I mean, you wouldn't choose to go in a corner and read Aesop's fables.
No.
They were read to you for your own good.
Yeah. And you knew that it was for your own improvement. And there's nothing worse than things being done to you well, there are maybe some worse things, but it's pretty awful having things done to you for your own improvement. And when you then go back, whether or not Aesop existed is moot. Martin, thought he was an invention. But a biography of somebody called Aesop was written. It may have been apocryphal. If he did exist, which I prefer to believe, he was a slave's child with all sorts of physical impediments. Possibly was even mute. Possibly. Who, because of his capacity for language and narrative and invention, fabulation, was able to, long story short, become a kind of Alistair Campbell, Tony Blair's spin doctor, an Alistair Campbell figure in the 5th, 6th century BC in Asia Minor and what is now known as Greece. And so people would employ him to negotiate before a judge, to argue, to help with elections. He was the person you brought in when you needed people to be persuaded to come and do something that you wanted. And he made a considerable reputation for himself and a considerable amount of money. It's not known whether he's literate or not. I'm not a classical scholar. I suspect he wasn't. I suspect he had all this material, this fabular material, which was probably already in circulation anyway, and he may have altered and tweaked and so on. But his special skill was that he could take a story and tell it, and then connect elements in the story to whatever the particular situation was, and people would then take they take the argument and the connections in the story, they take it away, and then like a meme, it would spread, because people didn't have, narrative available through the internet or television. And his material then spread, and people would, Romans and Greeks, would have had an Aesopian bank of narrative content and information, which they could call up at will which they could then deploy in whatever situation they were in. And that material was then subsequently written down, and then later it's got hold of by pedagogues, etc., etc.
It began as an oral education.
Yes, but it was for adults.
Yes.
It was for adults, and the moral was malleable. They weren't fixed machines for the delivery of platitudes. They were this supple, mouldable narrative thing that you could deploy dependent on the situation in which you found yourself. So at the end of his life, Aesop he was now very, very famous. And he went to Delphi, to the oracle, and he insulted them. And they planted a goblet or a piece of silverware in his baggage train, and then discovered it. And then, because it was such a terrible thing to do, to steal from the Delphic oracle, which was the center of social and religious practice in Greece, the only punishment was death. So they took him to a cliff and threw him off. That was how they killed him. But before they killed him, obviously he pleaded his case. And the story he tells us that he told them was the story of the frog and the mouse, which is the story in here. And in the frog and the mouse, the frog and the mouse form a friendship. The frog is big and expansive, and the mouse is timid. They form a friendship, and then the frog says, "Look, we don't want to get separated. Let's tie ourselves together." You know where this is going. Water, frog, in, twine, mouse still attached, drowns. There's no real explanation in the story as to why the frog does this. The frog is just, not a very nice frog. And the body of the mouse floats up, and a kite plucks the mouse out of the water. But of course the frog is still attached. And the frog can't get free, and the kite drops. It's dinner, bracket S, end bracket, eats. The mouse eats the frog. So Aesop's argument was he and the Delphinians were like the frog and the mouse. They were tied together. They could kill him if they wished, but it would lead to their undoing. That was his argument. They decided to kill him anyway by throwing him off a cliff. So they took him to the cliff and they threw him off. They hurled him off. That was what they did. There's a fable about that called the Trumpeter, which I might read.
Yes, do.
And then what happens? Delphi is overwhelmed. It's like in Oedipus. The crops fail. Everything starts to go wrong, and they realize that they have angered the gods by killing Oedipus, and they consult the oracle, and the oracle says, you will have to build a pyramid as an act of atonement, which they do. And then the crops come back and everything is fine again. And what I like about the Aesop, that story is that it shows everything about Aesop, which is he was simultaneously right and wrong, which is a very Aesopian idea.
Read us another one. Or two.
Yeah, right. I'll stand up. This is the Trumpeter. The Trumpeter. The battle was over, night had fallen. All prisoners stand, the guard shouted. The battered and defeated soldiers from the losing side stood. And quick, march! The weary prisoners began to trudge. They knew exactly where they were going, a high cliff. When they got there, they would wait out the night. And then, as the sun rose, because dawn was when it was done, they'd be tossed onto the brutal, jagged rocks at the foot of the cliff. And from there, their corpses, instead of being taken by their wives and mothers, tenderly washed, prepared for burial, and given their last rites, would be carried out to sea and devoured by the sharks. The prisoners and their guards reached the cliff top. It was still dark. "Right, you scum," the guard shouted, "sit down." Everyone sat except for the trumpeter. Permission to address the commanding officer, he requested the nearest guard. Granted. The guard led the trumpeter to his commanding officer. The officer was standing on the edge of the cliff, staring out to sea. He was waiting for the sun to show the top of his head over the horizon. As soon as this happened, he would give the order to start the killings. "Prisoner wishes to speak," said the guard. "Go on," said the officer to the trumpeter. "Spit it out. What is it?" "I'm not really a soldier," the trumpeter began, "and so I don't think I ought to be included in this business." "What do you mean?" said the officer. "You're one of the enemy, aren't you? You were captured with this rabble, weren't you?" He pointed at the prisoners slumped on the ground, grubby, sullen, and morose. "So, you get thrown over," the officer continued. "It's what we do. You lose, you go over. If we'd lost and I'd been captured, I'd be sitting on the ground, waiting my turn." "It's true," said the trumpeter. "I was taken at the same time as these other prisoners." "Oh, that'll be for me," said the trumpeter, "but I'd no weapon when I surrendered, you know. All I had was my trumpet. I'm the trumpeter. I've never used a weapon in my life. I've never hurt anyone in my life. With a weapon, I just play music. That's all." "You didn't kill us or try to kill us," said the officer, "at least not directly, I grant you that. But you and your bloody trumpet roused these wretches to bestir themselves, gather their arms, and come at us, hoping to kill us. You may never have carried a weapon like them, but it's you who got the battle going, and if anything, that makes you actually more eligible for execution than any of the men behind." The golden rim of the sun hoisted himself ever so slightly above the horizon. "There he is," said the officer to the trumpeter. "You'll go first. Enjoy the journey down." He hurled the trumpeter over the edge and then watched him falling, wailing terribly as he dropped away before smashing onto the rocks at the bottom and splitting open. A great pool of red and white oozed from the trumpeter's head. Then a great wave came over the rock on which the body lay. It lifted the corpse and carried it into the sea, and it took all the blood and the brain that was smeared everywhere as well. And after it was gone, the rocks were left clean and wet and shiny and nice and ready for the next body. "Let's go," the officer shouted. "Let's get this done." The guards blew their whistles and kicked all the prisoners to their feet. Some began to pray, others to weep or snivel. The first man was dragged towards the edge. Those behind him watched and waited, stunned and appalled. The moral is, a fox does not smell his own stench. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Odyssey, of course. You're fresh from an Odyssey reading group. I can tell. Well, in the Odyssey in Book 10, when Odysseus is on Circe's island, he's got within 10 days of Ithaca, and then they let the winds out of the bag, and so he's blown to Circe's island, which I cannot pronounce the name of her island. He wants to go back, and he goes to Circe and he says, "What can I do?" And she says, "Well, you have to go to Hades. You have to go to Hades and you have to talk to Tiresias and he will explain." They decide to go, and on the morning, Elphenor, one of his crewmen who's drunk on the roof of Circe's house, falls as he's getting down the ladder and breaks his neck. They arrive at the mouth of Hades, they perform their rituals. And the first person they meet is Elphenor, who says, "You have to go back to the island and bury me, otherwise my spirit will wander the earth. I'll never get in there." And that's why this form of punishment, throwing the people onto cliffs so that they would be washed out to sea, was particularly appalling. I'm going to read you now one called The Vixen and the Eagle. And then I'm going to sit down again. The Vixen and the Eagle. Unlikely as it may seem, the Vixen and the Eagle became good friends. Then, believing that if they were neighbours, they would like each other even more, they decided to live side by side. To this end, the Eagle built a great dry nest at the top of a pine tree and hatched her chicks up there, while the Vixen made a snug den in the thicket at the tree's base and delivered a litter of cubs there. One winter's day, when the Vixen was away foraging, the Eagle, who also wanted food for her young, spotted the Vixen's cubs playing at the foot of the tree. Her chicks were famished, and there was nothing to eat for miles in any direction. "I know we're friends, the Vixen and I," the Eagle said, "but there's nothing else for it. There'll have to be dinner. I'll have to take them." The Eagle dropped down, caught the fox cubs in her talons, flew them up to her nest and fed them, squealing and shrieking, to her fledglings. At dusk, the Vixen returned and saw the bone splinters and the fur scraps scattered around the base of the tree. "My cubs," she shouted, "my babies." The Vixen looked up and saw her sometime feathered friend sitting at the top of the tree in her nest, looking cool, calm, and haughty. "She's fed my babies to her babies," said the Vixen. She boiled now. Not with grief, but rage. "I want to rip her to shreds," she said. "But she has wings and I don't. She's of the air, I'm of the earth. I can never get at her, and so I can never punish her." The Vixen let out a long, anguished cry that the Eagle heard and recognized as the howl of pain the powerless make when the powerful betray them. "Scream all you like," the Eagle muttered. "It won't do you any good. I'm not listening." Maybe I should also dedicate this to Mr. Johnson. The next day, a hunter's camp nearby, a fire with a goat roasting on a spit, its discarded innards sizzling on the embers below. Flying overhead, the Eagle saw the lovely entrails and said, "They'll make a tasty titbit for my babies." She swooped down and snatched them up, not realizing that trapped in the kink of the intestine was a red-hot ember. And she flew it home. "My darlings," she said as she dropped the offal into the nest, "something to feast on." the chicks began to tear the viscera apart. The ember fell from the fold that had held it and dropped onto the nest's floor, an amalgam of ancient bracken and brittle leaf, old twig, dusty moss. Within seconds, the nest and then the whole branch on which the nest sat, and finally, the whole crown of the tree were on fire. Inside her den, the vixen heard coming from outside the roar of the flames and the squealing and the shrieking of the eagle's chicks. "What's going on?" she said. She rushed out, looked up, and saw the mother eagle circling through black, thick, resin-smelling smoke, and her eaglets, who couldn't fly, leaning over the edge of their burning nest. "Jump," their mother shouted. "Huh?" the vixen said. "My time has come." She tilted her head back, and she opened her jaws as wide as she was able. The eaglets jumped, plummeted, and plopped, one after another, straight into the vixen's wide, waiting mouth. Then the vixen closed her mouth, savagely chewed, and swallowed the pulpy, feathery whole in one great, greedy gulp. Overhead, the eagle let out a long, anguished cry that the vixen heard and recognized as the howl of pain the powerful make when the powerless pay them back. "Scream all you like," the vixen said. "It won't do you any good. I'm not listening." She wriggled into her hide, where she planned to lie and wait for the enormous meal in her belly to digest. Punishment is lame, but it comes in the end. So, the genesis for the book is I go for a walk with Gavin, the artist. And so Gavin and I both work in prison. And we decide we're going to do a Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, except it's Fear and Loathing in Belfast. We're going to walk from the Ravenhill, which is where the rugby ground is, and which is sort of East Belfast and nice. And we're going to walk all the way across the city up to Atlantic Avenue to go and see a prisoner that we know who's just been released. And he lives up in North Belfast, quite close to Ardoyne. Not in Ardoyne, but there's a lot of green, white and orange painted curbstones up there. There's lots of Union flags where we start. So off we walk. Well, actually, we were going to cycle. We give up the cycling because the city is just not configured for cycles. There's little problems like the West Link, the M1, the M2. I mean, the journey is a nightmare. And as we're walking, we're looking around and we're thinking, what? What have they done to this city? It's a mess. It's just insane, the way the built environment has been reconfigured. And then we start talking about the people who make these decisions. And within about half an hour, we're back. We both suddenly say, we loved Aesop as children, even though we were aware we didn't really sympathize with the platitudinous stuff. And we suddenly thought, well, why don't we take Aesop and reconfigure it and use it as a way of talking about a society where you have this terrible combination of gods who are indifferent, but also human beings who allow them to do what they do, mortals, as we do. So this is a book about our stupidity, as well as the awfulness of our masters.
It's a great project.
Yeah.
And
well,
you had 358 fables in the edition you were...
Yeah, we used the French edition, which has got 358.
Of which you could only choose 190.
Yeah.
So.
It had to be 190 because It has to be in multiples, it has to be decimal, it has to be in multiples of 10. And the number of fables had to add up to 10. So it had to be 190, it couldn't be 200. And I'm a completely sane human being.
You made the rules.
I made the rules, yeah.
Okay.
And as soon as we'd made that decision, it was really easy. It's only going to be 190, so there you go.
And did you read separately and agree
Yeah.
on paper? Or
Yeah.
did you sit down and argue?
No, there was no arguing.
Great.
No. No, we just,
So you were really unified by a moral purpose.
Yeah.
In a very Aesopian
which
way.
is to create a resistance text that's going to provoke world revolution. It's a very modest ambition, myself and Gavin.
Yes.
Yes.
And his illustrations are wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to look at the book close to it. That's a snake eating a frog.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
That's the snake eating the frog.
Very
But
wonderful.
it's we love Rackham, who did do an Aesop, and we love illustrated books. And we wanted to do an illustrated book, but that was a book for adults. And so if you look at the illustrations, they're full of, they sort of mash together the antique and the Hellenic with now. So the tortoise and the hare, we had to have the tortoise and the hare, has got kind of Adidas stickers and McDonald's, the McDonald's like free coffee voucher. The tortoise has these stuck to his tortoisey shell. Yeah, because we're V-hip.
Right.
Yes, me and Gavin. Yeah. And the other thing is, of course, these are, this is a short story festival.
Yes.
These are little short stories. The intention was to make something that each of the stories was complete and had a trajectory and a rise and a fall. We also redid all the morals. So all the morals came out of Champion's racial epithets. It's a book published in the 1920s and subsequently reissued. And it was a book of proverbs gathered mainly by colonial administrators all around the world and organised by country, not just by colonial administrators, philologists and so on. Most of these are Russian, German, Jewish, Middle European. But and I did take some Arabic ones and some South American ones, but they're mostly from Europe.
And they're sayings.
They're sayings, and then I would twist them and make them even more bitter. But they were bitter, and I could repurpose them, or sometimes I kept them as they are. The one about the club, I think that's it. I actually think that's a Greek one. Can't remember. But yeah, that's. So I just divided the stories, invented 8 categories, and selected 20 stories for 9 categories and 10 stories for 1 category, and hey presto, 190.
Very good.
Yeah, just like that.
You're actually echoing what Sarah Maitland was saying last night about reusing old stories. She would rewrite them as a contemporary short story. And her point was, these stories have been around for thousands of years. They're going to be far better than anything she thinks up after a cup of coffee in an afternoon. So use and reuse, recycle. And you've done that, I think, to some of the Aesops.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I've spent my whole life basically recycling and appropriating. But the thing is that what you encounter, what I felt I encountered in Aesop was 2 things. First of all, you come across archetypes and setups and characters and personalities who you are already familiar with because you've come across them in a different form in popular culture. So gags and shticks and conceits and tropes, you meet them in this ancient material. That's the first thing. The second thing is this ancient material doesn't concern itself with realism exactly, but it goes straight to the heart of suffering and violence and monstrousness and greed. So what you traditionally have to, if you're reading a modern realist text, you have to go through quite a lot of words to get to the punch. Aesop it just delivers the punch.
It's stripped right back.
Yeah, you know, yes. The blow is administered within 250 or 300 words. And that's really quite a skill.
Yeah, you actually find it hard to read more than, 4 or 5
No,
sittings?
you couldn't sit down and...
To pick up and put down.
Yes. It's like a glass of whiskey, you know, just 1 or 2, put it away, have another glass the next night.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
And I found the foxes very beguiling. There are many foxes, and they kept reminding me of people I know in Ireland, oddly enough. Seems to be the national character has something with the fox in it, or the cute whore, if you like.
But there's also this incredible sense in Aesop of a proper relationship to the natural world. These are human beings who wish to place themselves in a proper alignment to the climate, to animals, sometimes to each other, and to the gods. They are not casual and sloppy and insouciant. And I think that's why, and the animal stories clearly present human characteristics, but tweaked and altered in an animal form. And by decanting human behaviour into the animal, you're prepared to pay more attention, and you're prepared to learn, I think.
Definitely. And I think it's time to ask for questions. If anyone has something they'd like to ask. Yes.
Just,
Will you say this?
Or else just project.
it's just in relation to the generalities of the fables. You mentioned Boris Johnson. He's a classicist. You can probably read every single one of these and read them differently than he would perceive them.
Yeah.
He would see them. He would see himself as the fox rather than the eagle, or as the victim of the unscrupulous. So the powerful perceive the fables differently than we perceive them, and they probably don't perceive themselves to be the powerful. He might consider, just as an example of what I'm trying to say, he might consider Parliament the powerful and himself the victim. As a classicist, he probably would.
I'm sure you're right, and my answer to that is he's just completely wrong. It's just as simple as that. But his use of the classics. I mean, he was talking about Augustus and all of that, and that he was, what he's done by purging all those the 21 Tory MPs who were deselected, and that it would then lead, to a kind of lovely, glorious interregnum. I don't know enough about Roman history, but every single classical scholar who I've seen interviewed about it, Mary Beard, Tom Holland et al., say this is complete and utter nonsense. This gentleman has a question.
Thank you very much. I was wondering when and how you received the idea for the book. So the how has become now a little bit more clear, but is there a specific point when you received the idea to take
the actual moment we decided was after we'd been up to see our friend who'd just been released from prison in Atlantic Drive. We then went down to the Newton Ards Road to Freedom Corner. I don't know if you're familiar with Freedom Corner. It's got a man in a balaclava who tells us that the UDA is ready for peace. Wants peace but is ready for war. Something like that. It's a fearsome spot. I mean, Belfast is full of these. All murals, all curbstones, all flags, they're all marching. Everybody's marching, as far as I'm concerned. Gone. Go away, please, no more. So we were at Freedom Corner, which is the bottom of the Newton Ards Road, and it was actually as we were looking at these murals. And when you look at these murals, you think, hang on, somebody's gone, they're gigantic. It's like 40 feet of mural. Somebody's gone to an awful lot of trouble, basically, to say to anybody who isn't like the person who made the mural, fuck off. Basically, it means fuck off, you're not welcome. And that was the moment when we looked at each other and we said, we can actually make a book out of Aesop's work. And then Gavin went home and found his edition of Aesop and posted it to me that he'd had as a child. So he's Plymouth Brethren. Not anymore. You know what the Brethren is? Yeah. He's not Brethren now, but he was brought up Brethren. So he probably only had the parables in Aesop, and this was his favourite book.